I'm going to show you what I did to the ventral side of the Millennium Falcon. First thing I did was used a tiny drill to drill out every single little crevasse inside of the comb that makes up the engine. I tried a number of different tools and eventually settled up on that micro drill bit. You're going to need to clear off any of the plastic that builds up onto the drill, otherwise you'll end up tearing apart the engine comb. You'll have to remove it very carefully with some flush pliers, cutting away part of the plastic and then just pulling the plastic off of the drill itself. This whole process took about 20 minutes, and I was thinking to myself while doing it, maybe this is what it's like being on the other side of the dentist drill. And then I thought, nah, this is probably not anything like being a real dentist. Also, I haven't been to the dentist in a very long time, so I have no idea what modern dentistry is actually like. I used a X-Acto knife to clear out all of the remaining plastic debris to make sure that the engine LEDs shine all the way through and are not obstructed by any little bits of plastic. The next thing I did was remove any of the tabs and posts that are used to hold the engine comb into place so that there's no obstruction for the LEDs. I ended up settling on using a rotary tool to remove the plastic because it's actually pretty thick back there. Whenever you're using a disc cutter and moving the blade against the direction of the rotation, you have to be very, very careful not to lose control and then accidentally damage the outside of the model that you're working on. If you haven't been too aggressive with the drill on the engine grill, it should retain its shape. Then you can just glue it back into place with a little bit of Gorilla Glue gel. Later on, we're going to use some silicone glue to fill in that grill, and that way it'll be a diffuser for the LEDs. Now we're going to cut some holes into the ventral side of the Falcon's hull. We're going to need two holes, one for the headlight selector switch and another for the power connector. I'm using a Dremel engraving grinding tool to cut those holes. I'm not using a rotary tool or a drill because I want to go very slowly and very gently. It's difficult to judge the thickness of the plastic from the inside of the Falcon, so you're going to want to go very slowly and take off a small amount until you make a little teeny tiny hole. Once I cut through the hull, I realized it was pretty thick, and the switch wasn't going to stick out far enough to be, well, comfortably reached by larger fingers. So I decided that I was going to go ahead and make the hole large enough to fit the entire switch's housing. I slowly made the hole large enough until I could fit the switch through very snugly without it being loose. You can't really uncut plastic, so you're going to want to go real slow to make sure that you don't have to backfill any huge gaps with green stuff. The next step is to cut a hole for the power connector. I wanted it to be close to the peg, but not so close that it would interfere with any of the electronics. So basically I put that hole more or less where one of the loading ramps would be. I wasn't very careful, and it looks like the hole is a little too big, so that power connector is pretty loose. So I'm going to have to hold it in place with a little bit of green stuff and some super glue. The power connector type externally is a JST-PH connector. I chose a JST-PH because it has a little clip so you can't plug it in backwards. Internally, I'm going to use DuPont connectors to connect all the components together. It takes a lot of practice to get good with the crimping tool. The ratcheting, which means that you can apply a lot of force onto a connector without you doing much work, but unfortunately it means that once you start pressing the thing together, the gears don't let you open up the crimping tool until you're basically finished crimping the connector. A little trick that I use is that I bend the outermost clips in just a little bit so that they can press onto the wire and hold it in place while you apply the final crimp. Positioning is key. You want to make sure that the outermost clips are around the plastic, but the inside clips are only on the exposed wire itself before you crimp the entire thing down. Positioning for the final crimp with the crimping tool is also important. You want to make sure that the square part, which is going to go inside of the housing, is not crimped inside of the jaws of the crimper. The crimping tool jaw also has two stages inside of it. Basically, one stage is a wider stage that's designed to crimp the wire part of the collar, and then the second stage is designed to press down the inside clips and make contact with the wire. You can use a multimeter to make sure that you have a good crimp. You want to make sure that there's no resistance between both sides of the wire, especially into the connector that you just put on with the crimping tool. It takes a couple dozen tries, but then you're going to get pretty good at crimping with a crimping tool. And then you're going to be a pro. And then you can work in a sweatshop in Asia, where I'm sure they make these things by hand all day long. Now it's time to fix the connectors into place. So the power connector is going to require a little bit of doing, but the switch, because it fits so snugly, all I have to do is secure it with a little bit of super glue, making sure not to get any glue on the metal connectors where I'm going to need to do some soldering later on. So be very careful. If you mess up with the super glue, you can use a little bit of paper if you're fast about it. Because the power connector hole is a little bit too big, I'm going to have to use some green stuff to hold it into place. Green stuff can be found at any hobby store, especially your local game store, where it's in the Warhammer section. It's basically your best friend in this industry. You can wrap a small little strip of it around the power connector so it won't go through the hole. And then, in this case, I'm also going to supplement it with some super glue just to make sure that it's adhering into the hull and won't pop out when I try to push in a power connector. If you were a real wargaming pro, what you'd probably be doing is washing and cleaning before you use the green stuff on to join two things together, and then also using a pin to hold it in place. But for our purposes, because this is on the inside of the model, super glue is going to be good enough. You want to also make sure, though, that you don't get super glue on the connectors for the power connector. Otherwise, you are not going to get any power at all for your electronics, and then you'll have to redo the entire step. I'm using a screwdriver to kind of mush down the green stuff onto the glue to make sure that I have the most surface contact so the adhesive can hold the connector in place. My last step is to remove some additional internal plastic on the bottom half of the hull. And the reason is because this is where I'm going to fit in an LED so that a light can shine through from the main fuselage of the Falcon through the fuselage of the escape craft and form that single headlight for when the escape craft is actually docked to the Falcon. That's it for this part of the Falcon. Tune in next time when I work on the top half of the customized YT-1300 hull. Thanks for watching.